good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for those of you in Europe. Sorry for a 1 minute delay. We will start in 2 minutes. We're just letting people in, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Mario Malički. I'm a peer review committee chair from EASE, and I work at Stanford University, and I will be the moderator of this session. You are welcome to post questions in the Q&A as well as in the chat. We'll be looking at both of those, whatever is more convenient for you. I would, however, kindly ask that you keep your questions for after the presentation so that we have a Q&A session. We have 3 wonderful speakers with us today, and each of them will be speaking from 7 to 10 minutes, and then we'll have half an hour for Q&A. And having said that, let me please introduce our panelist. Before I actually do that, I would like to ask a little question about all of you participating. So we will run a very short poll, and I'm here to be helped with Mary Hodgson, who is a peer review, who is an EASE secretary, and Duncan Nicholas, who will be helping us with the Q&A. Okay, so it's very nice to see that almost 50% of you are undecided on this topic. So this is what we're here to discuss and see where we are, and then hopefully maybe we'll sway some opinions by the end of this panel. So it is really my pleasure to introduce our 3 wonderful panelists we have with us, and I'll present them in the order that they will be presenting. Professor James Zou, who is an associate professor of biomedical data science, computer science, and electrical engineering at Stanford University. He's the faculty director of Stanford AI for Health, and he works on improving the foundations of machine learning by making models more trustworthy and reliable, as well as working on their in-depth scientific and clinical applications. Many of his work has been widely used in tech and biotech industry, and he has received both the Sloan Fellowship, NSF Career Award, to Chan Zuckerberg Investigator Award, and Top 10 Clinical Achievement Awards. He has won several Best Paper Awards and faculty awards from Google, Amazon, Tencent, and Adobe. And it is also my pleasure that Professor Zou works at Stanford University, and I wasn't aware of his presence because I'm very new at Stanford University. But then I found out an archive paper that I'm very glad that he will present today and share his finding on peer review with us. Our second speaker will be Lu Sun. Lu Sun is a PhD candidate in the design lab at the University of California, San Diego. She's advised by Professor Stephen Dow and Kristen Vaccaro. She focuses on human-computer interaction and social computing and explores the potential of using large language models and AI to scaffold knowledge work, including sense-making and writing in the science context. And she's here today to present the development of interfaces that help facilitate the academic peer review processes. And finally, we have Mike Thelwall. Mike is a professor of data science in the Information School at the University of Sheffield in the UK. So Mike is, local time at 4 p.m., while the 3 of us are 8 a.m. here in US area. So I'm really happy to have a wide diversity of both speakers and participants. Mike primarily investigates quantitative methods to support research evaluation, including artificial intelligence, citation analysis, and altmetrics. He also published books, including Webbing Indicators for Research Evaluation, a Practical Guide, and is an associate editor of the Journal Association for Information Science and Technology. Each of the speakers will present around 7 to 10 minutes, and then we will have the Q&A. Please make sure if you're asking a specific question for one of our panelists, you refer to their names at the beginning of your questions. That way we can tailor the discussion exactly that you hear the answers from whom you want to. And if you're posting a question to our panelists or quoting on Twitter, we would highly appreciate if you use the Twitter handle of EASE Events. We will copy this info into chat so you may refer to it. And now I would like to invite Professor Zou to share his slide and his presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mario, for the introduction and for organizing this event. And really nice to meet everyone here. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Can you see the slides? Okay, super. Yeah, so I'll just take a few minutes to share some of the explorations we've been doing recently around testing this idea of how well can large language models like ChatGPT, how well can they actually provide feedback on research papers? So, as a professor, I spend a lot of my time dealing with reviews, right? And recently, some of my students were complaining a little bit that they think that some of the reviews that they have gotten are likely to be written by ChatGPT or by other language models, right? So we wanted to actually look at this a little bit more carefully, right? So what we did was that we first just grabbed all the publicly available reviews from iClear, which is one of the main AI conferences from the last 4 or 5 years. And we looked at frequencies of the usage of certain words, right, among the iClear reviews. And for example, you see some quite striking patterns. So for example, if you look at the word like commendable, right? So the usage of commendable in these reviews was quite low, right? Up until around 2023, and then really spiked up. Similarly for some of these other words like meticulous or intricate. Now, what's really interesting is that first, these words like commendable, they are, their spiking usage really coincided with the release of ChatGPT. And second is that these words are also much more likely to be used by a language model when the language model is writing a review than by human reviewers, right? So from, these combination of evidence suggests to us that, okay, it's like maybe the usage of language models in writing reviews is really going up quite rapidly. So we motivated by this. So in this paper that we have, which we'll present in ICML in a couple of months, we developed a statistical method to basically take all of these words like adjectives, right, across the entire vocabulary to robustly try to estimate what fraction of the sentences that we think are actually written by large language models, right, among all the reviews. And this is what we show here in this plot, right? So the different colored dots correspond to different venues of publication. So a lot of these come from computer science because that's where it's easier for us to actually get all these publicly available reviews. So for example, the orange dot here corresponds to EMNLP, which is one of the main natural language processing conferences. And if we look at all the reviews that were from the most recent cycle of EMNLP, our estimate is that around 16% of the sentences across all of those reviews are likely to be written by large language models. Right. Another dot here would be iClear, which is another main AI conference. It just wrapped up last couple of weeks ago, and then around 10% of the iClear reviews we estimate are also written by large language models. So you can see that actually the usage of large language models in writing reviews is already quite substantial, especially among the computer science communities, and it's going up. In addition to quantifying what fractions of a text in reviews are written by AI, like you might also be interested in what fractions of a text in the actual research papers are written by AI, right? So we applied a similar methodology to answer that second question. So what we did here is to basically curate all the recently posted papers from the archive, from the bioRxiv, right? So for example, the red colored curve here corresponds to the papers that were posted on the archive under the computer science section, right? And then the y-axis is again our estimate of what fraction of the sentences, right, in these papers we estimate are written by large language model. And that estimate is also going up quite rapidly, right? So currently, we think the most recent set of computer science papers on the archive, around 17% of those we estimate are also written by large language models. Now, that rate of increase differs across different domains, different sub-areas. Right? So for example, if you look at the bioRxiv, which is this purple dot here, the purple line, it's going up more slowly, but it is still increasing, and currently it's going up to around 8%. Right? So the Nature family journals, which is this yellow line here near the bottom, is going up more slowly still, but you can still see this increasing trend. Right. So I think these results show something quite interesting, which is that we are really in the midst of this transformation, right, in the research landscape, right, where already a lot of the papers that we read and reviews that we read are written substantially with the help of large language models, right? And that trend is definitely increasing very rapidly over the next few months. So one question that we're interested in, right, is just how well then can large language models actually provide feedback on research papers, right? And this might be especially be useful, right, if we're thinking about large language models as potentially like almost like a research code advisor, right? Especially thinking about using it to provide feedback on research proposals or even earlier stages of research ideas. So to test this hypothesis, right, so we developed a system for using large language models and teaching these models like GPT-4 to provide feedback to authors, right? The system is quite intuitive. So basically the researchers and authors can upload like a paper, maybe like a first draft of their paper. And then we will first parse that PDF, right? And to extract out different sections like the figures, the captions, the methods, etc. And then we teach GPT-4, right, to how to give useful feedback to the authors, right, how to get constructive feedback to the different parts of the paper, right? And then that feedback then will be provided back to the original researchers, the authors. This whole pipeline will take around less than a minute to run, so it's quite fast. So basically, the authors will get these feedback essentially in real time. So to test the quality of the feedback produced by the language model, the first thing we did was to basically compare how much does the feedback produced by the language model overlap, right, with the feedback produced by the human expert reviewers, right? So one way we did this is that we curated about 3,000 papers published in Nature Family Journals, where the reviews from the human experts are available. So then we can basically quantify the overlap, which we also call this hit rate, right, between the AI-generated feedback and then the reviews from the human experts later on. So the higher the hit rate means that there's a larger overlap. And the main interesting finding, the takeaway message here from this analysis is that basically the overlap, right, between the AI review and the human review is actually comparable to the overlap between two different human reviewers of the same paper, which is promising because it suggests that the AI is actually likely to raise very many similar comments that the human experts is also likely to raise later on. And we also repeated this analysis for iClear, which again is one of the main AI conferences, and find a similar finding, right? So this suggests that this kind of the overlap between AI feedback and human reviewers is quite consistent, quite similar across different domains, from science to biology to medicine to computer science. And it's also interesting to think about, what are the aspects of the feedback, right, that the language model is more likely or less likely to comment on compared to the human reviewers. So we quantify this in this this little plot here. So the x-axis of this plot basically corresponds to the frequency ratio, or the log frequency ratio between the AI feedback and the human feedback, right? So if it's larger than 0, that means that this is something that the AI is more likely to discuss compared to humans. If it's less than 0, then the human reviewer is more likely to discuss that topic than compared to the AI. And we looked at this across the different common topics, right? So for example, for some of these topics like algorithmic efficiency or reproducibility, or clarity of presentations, right? So it's close to 0, means that both the AI and human are equally likely to discuss these aspects of the paper. But interestingly, right, so reviewers are more likely to talk about things like novelty, right? Maybe like missing citations, especially if it's a reviewer's own citations, right? And compared to the AI, right? In comparison, the language model is more likely to raise comments around, let's say, the broader implication of research, right? Possibly because it actually has read and it's been trained on this vast corpus of literature from PubMed, from the archive, right? So it's actually is able to better contextualize this new manuscript in the context of this broader research landscape. But by and large, I think there's actually some quite interesting and complementary aspects that the human reviewer and the AI system is able to provide to the authors. So then to really test how useful the system is, right? So we conducted a prospective study, right? So we released the system that we built and then invited researchers and volunteers from over 100 different institutions participated, where they would upload a draft of their paper. Usually these would be early stages of their manuscripts before they submit it for publication. And then our GPT system will provide the feedback, right? Try to provide useful feedback to the authors. And if the authors agree to it, then they would also complete a survey just to quantify how useful did they find the feedback from the AI in improving their manuscript. So here are basically the main results from this prospective user study. So the first question here is basically assessing how useful did the authors actually find the feedback from the AI system, right? In this study, about 57% of the participants, authors actually found the AI feedback to be quite helpful in helping them to improve their research project. So that's quite promising, I think. The second question basically asks, how much does the feedback, right, from the AI, so AI's assessments of the strength and weakness of this project align with the author's own internal assessment? Because we think the authors are often well-placed to assess the strength and weakness of their own paper, of their own projects. So we want to see how much the AI sort of agrees with their assessment. So as a sort of a sanity check. And this is also quite good, right? So around 60% of the time, there's actually reasonable alignment, right, between the AI's assessment of the strengths and weaknesses compared to the author's own internal assessment of their own work. And then the last question that we show here is basically asking how useful did the authors find the AI feedback compared to the feedback from the human reviewers. And here, about 40% of the time, it's interesting that the participants actually found the feedback from this language model to be more helpful than some of the feedback that they've received from the human reviewers. So there's a bunch of more questions that we asked and analyzed in this user study, but these are sort of the three main ones that I just want to highlight. And just to be clear here, right, I think we don't want to propose to replace the human reviewers, right, with this AI language model feedback system. I think it's still really important for the integrity of the scientific process, right, to have the human experts to independently and deeply engage with each work to assess their quality, right, and the contributions before the final publication. Where we've seen that this AI system can be the most useful is sort of earlier stages in the research pipeline, right? So imagine if you have the first draft of your paper, right, instead of waiting for weeks to get some external feedback, right? So you can actually get basically instantaneous feedback from the language model, which is, as we've seen here, able to provide some useful and constructive suggestions. I think this system from the AI feedback can be especially beneficial for more junior researchers or for researchers at under-resourced institutions and countries, because it might be especially challenging for them to get timely feedback from external experts, but the AI can provide these more real-time suggestions and feedback. Yeah. So I think overall, we are already seeing this trend of AI being used, right, in writings of papers and reviews, as we quantified in the first few examples that I showed, right? And these user studies that we conducted here also demonstrate that if we teach language models to provide useful feedback, they can actually be a useful resource for researchers, especially in earlier stages of their writing. So I'll just wrap up here, and then happy to have more discussions during the discussion phase.
Thank you. And there's already questions for you in the Q&A. Feel free to answer them then, or wait by the end of the when we open up the questions. Lou, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for Mario's invitations. Today, I'm going to talk about review flow in intelligent scaffolding to support academic peer reviewing process for novice reviewers. And this is a joint work with Aaron Chen, James Zou, and Stephen Dao. As we may have already noticed, many research communities are seeing a rapid increase in submissions. For example, in the HZ conference, SIGCHI, the submission increased 50% compared with 2016. This may provide stresses for academic peer review ecosystem. We also see more novice reviewers in our peer review process. To give you some idea of this, in the CHI 2023 conference status, in 5 out of 18 subcommittees, the majority were playing the roles of the meta reviewers or AC role for their first time. And very few ACs have 4 or more years experience in that role. This means like many first-time ACs are involved in this process, or likely also many first-time reviewers, although we don't have the exact figure on the reviewer set, entered into this peer review ecosystem. Reviewers usually trained on conducting research, and sometimes there's no specific training designed for peer review writing. The current review system, PCS, which is used for many HCI conference, only provides several questions as the review considerations. Maybe individual labs are training their students to write reviews in different ways, but the guidelines provided by their community usually be generic and focus on the final written reviews and the decision, rather than the process of doing a review. However, the complexity of comprehending, decision-making, and writing reviews makes this task difficult for novices. To solve this challenge, we asked 3 questions in this project. First, we interviewed 10 novice reviewers to understand their challenges and observed 10 experienced reviewers demonstrate their strategies and the paper review process. Based on the interview study result, we employed the concept of scaffolding to design the review flow system, which can intelligently scaffold novice reviewers in the writing process. We then conduct an evaluation study to understand how does this intelligent scaffolding provided by AI in the system affect the review quality, process, and perceptions. By observing 10 experts, we found that many experts adopt a workflow involving critical reading, annotating, note-taking, and synthesizing a well-justified reviews. And for each step of experienced reviewers' workflow, we found novice challenges. Novice reflect that they lack opportune considerations for assessment. They need context-specific guidelines to help them think about each dimensions. In a stage of evaluate and assess the paper, novices are not confident about their domain knowledge for novelty considerations. Some features to provide knowledge support are needed. In the review writing stage, novices reflect that they lack guidance on process and structure. They're also uncertain about whether the tone delivered in the review is appropriate or do their reviews meet the community expectation. So faced with these challenges, we adopt the concept of scaffolding in learning to guide novices in the process. By definition, scaffolding is the support given to students by an instructor throughout the learning process. And based on these design considerations, we propose scaffolding features correspondingly. Here's an overview of the system on writing reviews for a short CSCW conference paper. Review flow lists the paper on the left, notes in the middle, and has a review drop panel on the right. Users can highlight a part of a task that they would like to reflect on and then pick one review criteria, such as importance to CSCW conference, and the review flow provides an adaptive reflection questions using the selected paper content and the community guideline. So this question is asking the user to reflect, how does this paper contribute to our understanding and enhancement of CSCW in virtual studying, citing amidst privacy and self-awareness concerns? These cues or questions are also provided in the section level, which shows next to each section header. Reviewers can use these highlighted questions to reflect on their considerations of the paper and select text that they can edit on the middle panel. When users read the related work section, review flow will recommend 3 papers that are potentially related in the same topic and same venue but not get cited. User can check to get further information around this research area to get a better sense of the quality of this research. For each citations, when user hover on it, a pop-up card can also show up and contextually with the basic information on the paper. When user finish taking notes, they can click the Summarize My Notes button in the middle, where the system will only take their written notes, text, together with the PDF content as input to generate an outline with broad topics. These topics are also organized in a summary, strengths, and weakness section. And when users hover on each of the topic, the system will highlight the corresponding notes and PDF content to help them fact-check the topic. Users can add more strengths and weakness topics if they think is needed. User can select to expand these topics as a longer outline with specific bullets under topics. And users can reuse this content to help them write their own writing. When users make a decision and submit, they're asked to self-reflect on their written draft on their tone, comprehensiveness, and constructiveness. To create this contextual and process-oriented scaffolding with AI, we only take users' written notes, paper abstract, and user-highlighted content as input, together with the community guidelines and templates as prompts for the LLM to generate this topic outlines for users to reflect on their perceptions of the paper. To evaluate this tool, we conduct a within-subject experiment where we recruited 16 inexperienced reviewers to write reviews using review flow versus the baseline system, which contains minimal guidelines in a counterbalance order. All participants conduct reviews on 2 HCI short papers with more than 25 hours interval in between. They also filled out the surveys and being interviewed at the end. To evaluate the review quality, we invited 2 expert reviewers to read the papers and reviews, and then provided ratings on each dimensions of the review quality from 1 to 7 Likert scale, including tone, comprehensiveness, constructiveness, justified, and an overall score. We found that review flow helped participants write more comprehensive reviews where they called out more strengths and weakness in the paper. However, there's no significant improvement in the constructiveness of the review. We also found participants took a significantly longer time to read papers with review flow, but a slightly shorter time on drafting final review than baseline. Participants reflect that they spend more time on carefully evaluating the paper and answering these contextual questions proposed by review flow. Participants reflect that they are more confident about their review writing skills after experiencing review flow. For example, P11 mentioned that I feel I gradually build up this confidence. At the beginning, I will try to answer every question, but later on, I started to remember which aspect I should think about while reading that section. In a post-interview, participants also expressed their concerns that maybe last-minute reviewers may randomly leave notes and then use the tool to generate an outline. The misuse of this tool will not be fair to the paper authors and the review community in general. So to sum up this talk, we found that contextual and process-oriented scaffolding used by review flow can help novice reviewers to write a better review, though take a longer time. In the study, scaffolding can help participants gain confidence and learn the process. This study also reflects on some tensions of using AI. The AI is primarily for training purpose in our tool. Participants did not express severe concerns during their own study sections, since the generated outline mainly reused or summarized their notes. However, they were still worried that nuanced tones in the outline produced by AI may exaggerate the weakness of the paper and influence the reviewer's perceptions. Moreover, participants expressed their concerns of other reviewers in the community, so the misuse of this tool will bring fairness issues in the research community in general. More discussions around policy and practice are needed within the research venues. I will end my talk here, and I'm happy to take any questions. Please visit our website for a live demo and more information.
Thank you. And we have a final speaker, Mike. The floor is yours.
Okay, I should be sharing my screen now.
Yes, we can see it. It's great.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. And those last 2 talks were amazing. So I'm going to talk about a different aspect of the same issue, really. So the talk is, can ChatGPT evaluate research quality? So I'm focused here on post-publication research quality assessment. So this is a kind of issue that would be relevant to you when you're applying for a job and they assess the quality of your publication. So the publications that have already gone through peer review and have been published, and then for some decision-making process, someone evaluates the quality of that research. So in the context of this, we do this systematically in the UK. So every few years, our best 1 to 5 publications get a score between 1 and 4 by a double expert review, a form of post-publication peer review. And depending on our score, we get a lot of money or nothing at all. So in this scheme, if you get a 4-star for your paper, you get a lot of money. And if you get a 1-star or a 2-star, you get nothing at all for your research. So it's a very important post-publication quality assessment process. And the scores are given by 1,120 experts in 34 different fields. A few other countries use a similar process. But I'm using this because it gives data on post-publication peer review, specifically quality criteria for giving these scores. So this process takes a year to do, very time consuming. So if it could be automated in any way, then that would save a lot of expert time. So I built a ChatGPT for the main panel D, which is the Arts and Humanities and a bit of Social Sciences panel, to try to get it to follow the guidelines given for the evaluators. So there's a published document which explains how the evaluators are supposed to assess research quality for journal articles and other publications. And I use those to build a custom GPT. And then I fed in 51 of my own articles because I'm the copyright owner for them, and asked it to follow the guidelines and give a quality score, and also to write a report. So this is an example of one of the reports on one of my own articles, which does follow the REF guidelines. It does follow the guidelines as it's supposed to, and it does give a detailed and very plausible output. So it does write a very good peer review report on all these articles that is difficult to realize is not written by a human. So I looked at over 1,000 of these, and I think of the 1,000, there were only about 3 which contained a clear error, but you'll probably get a similar error rate or even higher for humans. So it's fantastically good at writing the reports. And then I also compared the scores that the ChatGPT gave to the articles with my own self-evaluation of the scores of these articles. And on this graph, wherever you see a rectangle, if there are any blobs in the rectangle, it means that's where ChatGPT has given a score that agrees with my score. So for the 51 papers that were fed in, each was fed in 15 times, and often a different score was given in several of the 15 times. So there was only one paper that always got the same score from ChatGPT, and the rest got a range of different scores. And on average, the correlation between the human scores and the ChatGPT scores was only 0.3 across these 51 articles, which range from the lowest score, 1, to the highest score, 4. And if you average the ChatGPT's scores, then the average gave a higher correlation, 0.5. So that is a reasonably good correlation, although only moderate, between the average ChatGPT and the human. But if you just look at the higher quality articles, if you take away the low quality articles, then the correlation is only 0.2, which wasn't statistically significant. So what ChatGPT is able to do to a small extent is to differentiate between the higher quality articles and the lower quality articles in the long run, but it's not very good at differentiating between similarly high quality articles. It has almost no capability to differentiate between the quality of the similar quality articles, which would be in the UK ref, this would be virtually all the articles submitted. So for virtually all the articles submitted, they would be of a high enough quality that ChatGPT wouldn't be able to differentiate between them in the quality. So statistically, it isn't good enough to do the job of assessing the quality of published academic research unless the set of articles you're assessing includes some low quality papers. So I tried to work out why ChatGPT could differentiate between the weakest and the strongest articles. So I ran some experiments, and then one of these was feeding it with fake articles. So I created a fake article to see if it could assess the significance specifically of this fake article. So it was about squirrel surgeons generating citation impact. So this was a real article, one of my own that I didn't publish, where I changed some of the words to make it about squirrel surgeons. And it wrote a very plausible report on this, giving it either a 3-star or a 4-star. So it assessed it to be internationally excellent or world leading. And the reports are very plausible, so it hadn't understood that the article was impossible. So although it had some degree of assessing the originality, significance and rigor, which are the ref criteria of articles, it didn't have the common sense to be able to clearly identify that an article wasn't plausible research, which is a bit of a paradox, because if you ask it, can squirrels write research, which was what the previous paper was about, it's very clear that they can't. So it's very clear that it understands, if you specifically ask it, that squirrels can't write academic research, but it will still give a 4-star or a 3-star rating to a paper about squirrels writing academic research. So it's frustratingly able to write plausible things where it understands, or it has within its large language model, the knowledge that the thing it's assessing isn't true. So overall, ChatGPT 4 has a weak ability to differentiate between good and weak research, but not really the ability to differentiate between good research, different levels of good research. And as we've seen in the other talks, the first talk particularly, plausible fake reports are really a threat to reviewer integrity. I found it very difficult to assess that these reports hadn't been written by a human, although I've seen so many that I'm starting to get an intuitive feel that I'm reading something written by ChatGPT, which is very useful when assessing student work at the moment. Okay, so thank you very much. Happy to answer questions later.
Thank you all, and thank you all the speakers. And now I invite you all to ask some questions, and I'll ask some of mine as well. Feel free to ask them in the chat or in the Q&A. And as you've seen, Professor Zou and Lou have already answered some of your questions, so we'll continue with that. There has been a question, of course, Professor Zou, one in the chat, so I'll read it out to you. I wonder what the graph showing the estimated percentage of large language model generated text in papers would look like if normalized by the average time it takes to write a paper in each of these subject areas. Maybe that could explain some differences between the slopes we've seen in your graph.
Yeah, it's a good question. We have done some additional analysis where we saw that, for example, in domains where the papers tend to be shorter, like in some areas, computer science, we also see like a higher usage, right, of large language models. And in addition, also in sub areas, in topics where it's more crowded and more competitive, right? So meaning that there are a lot of other researchers working on similar areas. That's also where we see like a higher usage of the language models.
And there was another question by our own secretary asking, do you think it would be useful for authors to submit their papers for peer review before submitting to your journal, or would you prefer to have this be done in parallel, you know, when you obtain the human reviewers and then also get an AI reviewer?
I think doing it before would be a good way to use it. So you know, we're talking with various journals, potentially using this as like a pre-submission service, right? So where maybe authors would upload, could be in even an earlier stage of their draft, right? And then have the language model provide some constructive feedback on that. And maybe also even providing feedback on whether this paper is appropriate for that journal, or if the paper might be better suited for some other journals. Right? And that would become like ideally like a pre-submission service before the authors will actually do the official submission. Right? And I know that there are actually many editors in the audience here. So if you have other ideas on using this, or if you're interested in collaborating, definitely very happy to follow up.
So one of the questions that I had for you, which we sort of engaged a little bit before, as you know, we have been working on promoting use of structured peer review at journals, where these questions and the things that are being evaluated are very clearly stated and asked of reviewers. And how likely do you think it is, if the large language models, be it ChatGPT or something, in-home developed, are trained actually on specific examples of reviewing those specific questions rather than these sort of general, give me an overview of all of that? If we focus on, zoom in something, do you think will increase the reliability of information?
I think so. Yeah, I think if we ask the models to do something very specific, right, and if we give it examples through these sort of in-context learning or through some sort of fine-tuning, then I think that would further enhance the reliability of the language model as to provide relevant reviews, right? And I think along those lines, there are also some relatively easier, let's say, use cases of these models. So, for example, a lot of the journals now have these different checklists, right? Like for example, in biomedical journals, often people want to say, okay, so do you report the p-values in a specific way, right? Or do you submit your code in a specific format, right? And then in those cases, it's often quite tedious for the human reviewers to just manually check through all of those usages, right? But that's something that would actually be relatively easy to train a GPT-4 to just check through, like, okay, are the authors actually following the reporting guidelines from the journal? Did the authors actually submit to the code, right? And is the code runnable, right? This basically just to go through the manual, go through the checklist automatically and just verify the different points.
And Mike, maybe a question for you from one of our attendees is, what would be your interpretation? Why do we see a little bit of more contrasting results between your own study and Professor Zou's study?
Yeah, I think it's so for my study, the reports written by ChatGPT were plausible and they did give good evaluations, but they just didn't show the ability to differentiate between different types of high quality. So it was the overall judgment that they weren't good at. So to assess the magnitude of the significance of the research of a paper, ChatGPT wasn't good at, or assessing the overall strength of the method. So it's good at identifying maybe gaps or making specific suggestions, but it's not so good at making the kind of the ballpark analysis. Okay, this is a really good paper, or this is just a good paper. So the kind of judgments that a review committee, a tenure or appointments committee will make when they read your papers, you apply to a job and you send them their two best papers, and they've got to decide after reading the paper, is this a really excellent world-leading paper, or is it just a good paper? So that's the kind of decision it's not very good at making. When the paper's published and the paper is basically fine and good, it can't really work out just how good it is. So the scale is not very good at.
Do you think we're actually asking the same questions? I mean, we are not really asking it to compare the two papers. We're asking it to evaluate it on a score from sort of 1 to 5, in simplicity terms. And then we think that because it scores them independently, that is the score. But if we actually forced it to compare two papers, do you think we would find differences? Because what you've shown, and I think what was fascinating aspect is, if you feed the same paper multiple times, you don't get always the same scores. And that is, when we talk about reproducibility of any program, that's a very interesting thing, because if I ask you today to evaluate the same thing, I kind of expect it to be maybe a bit better than in the past. And maybe in a year, they will be way better. So I was curious what you think of this.
Yeah, it was interesting that it didn't get the same score, and it also didn't write the same report at all each time. So if it assessed a paper 15 times, the same paper, it would write 15 different reports on the same paper. And overall, it probably had 20 different broad structures for the reports. So it wrote different styles of reports. Pulling up, probably, we didn't specifically assess this, but probably pulling up similar main themes in the reports, but they were in different styles, yeah, with different scores. So it definitely wasn't consistent with itself. So the only one stylistic thing that all the reports had in common was that they started off with a summary of the paper, even though we didn't ask it to make a summary of the paper. They all started with a summary of the paper, but after that, they structured the peer review report that they produced in very different ways, the different ChatGPTs. So it was it's very good at including randomness, but still doing the job it's been asked to do in a plausible way.
Professor Zou, please go on. You had a comment.
Yeah, so thanks, and it's very interesting study by Mike. Really, really excited to hear those results. I think one thing that we found helpful in reducing the randomness, right, is that we give the language model and we teach it sort of very specific instructions on how to provide the feedback, right? And often these are the instructions that also, for example, in the computer science conferences that are given to the human reviewers and given to the area chairs and editors on how to evaluate the papers. So we found that by giving the language model these very specific instructions and examples, then it made it so that it's often producing much more sensible responses. And the other thing we want to comment on is that we do find it's often challenging to have the language model, like Mario said, to produce like a numerical score of like what is good research versus not so good research, just because some of that can be quite subjective. Like even the human experts have a lot of disagreements on like, what is world-class versus okay research, right? Which is why we didn't, in our system, we didn't actually ask the language model to provide these kind of numerical assessments, but it's more really trained to provide constructive feedback on like of the flavor that, oh, you missed this other experiment, or you should have added this baseline comparison that would improve the work, right? And I think it's actually those kind of more of the constructive feedback that's in our user study, the authors found to be more useful rather than like a numerical assessment of their work.
And one question for Lou. Can you, in many fields, and especially in biomedicine where I come from, reporting guidelines are sort of the standardized way of maybe even reviewing, if not only writing articles. And when you compare that sort of template to take, because I remember when I was a PhD student, one of the classes we had is they would give us, this is the reporting guideline for that study, you know, go through the study, go to the reporting guideline, and then see how it is. How does that compare in your view to the review flow?
That's a really interesting question. I think the powers of AI is, like in the review flow, is we can contextualize the review guideline to a specific paper content. So like the community guidelines and templates is usually generic. Like for the same conference, we have the exactly same guidelines for novices to use. However, like the powers of review flow is like we take the paper content, the general research context of these papers, and what the user highlighted content, which means where the user is focusing on, as input. And then we use these guidelines and templates as prompts and instructions for the LLM to produce like more contextualized, process-oriented questions for reviewers to reflect on. And I think when we compare, like in a preliminary study, we compare this questions versus a community guideline, community generic questions. It seems like novice reviewers prefer to have like more specific questions that they can directly reflect on.
Maybe a little bit of futuristic questions, but in theory, you know, a lot of these AIs now we're able to talk to them. What do you think if the AI itself was using the reviewer flow? If we, you know, train ChatGPT to use the reviewer flow to review the papers? That's a good, really interesting questions. Actually, like in a study, users can tend to like raise these concerns, like what if AI is leaving random notes? But the thing is, like we highly like when we generate the outlines, we highly rely on where the user take notes. And then the user notes need to be understandable and comprehensive. If they only need like a leave random like notes, there's no way that the review flow can generate a high quality of reviews out of like from that. So we have like several limitations that they need to the
notes need to be more than 10, and they need to be understandable, and then they need to be like specific and long. It cannot be like random notes leaved like using like several words. It's kind of set the limitations of review flow, but it also kind of prevents some extreme use cases of this type of tool.
So Megan in the Q&A asked one very interesting question. We know that most of the peer review data is, held back by journals and publishers and is not available. So most of these models, including ChatGPT, likely didn't have access to actual review reports. So do you feel that, with maybe more and more journals using open peer review and maybe sharing of this data, the models itself would be trained? Because we haven't really heard, you hear in the news, New York Times or Reddit recently signed, contracts with OpenAI to train on those models, but we don't know how many of the models have actually been trained on peer review data. Would anyone like to think or comment on this?
I think it's a good question. I think there are, in some domains like computer science, the reviews are more publicly available. I think that's been the case especially for a lot of the AI conferences in the last few years. But in the other scientific domains, like social science, especially, or even some of the biomedical and health sciences, a lot of the reviews are not available. But I agree with you. I think if we have more publicly available review data, or especially examples of what constitutes like good, useful feedback to the authors, right, then I think we can use that to further fine-tune the language models to be more helpful.
One of the things that we see often is that students and reviewers sometimes are harder to evaluate the difficult aspects of statistics. We haven't yet really seen them being used to answer these specific questions, to really evaluate how good the statistics or the evaluation methods was. And I think we need examples of this both in the literature and testing in the models to see what happens. We also have a question of, how would you declare use of these tools currently if you were using them as an author or a reviewer? Yes,
Lou.
please do. Mike, did you want to say something or?
Yeah, sorry. So I think as a reviewer, you're on really dodgy ground if you use a public ChatGPT, because you're then uploading an article or a document paper that you've signed a confidentiality agreement with to a public source that might regurgitate it in responses to other reviewers' queries or other people's queries. So I think I'm pretty sure copyright wouldn't allow, or your agreement as a reviewer would allow that. And I'm pretty sure people are also doing it. People are uploading these documents. Well, the James data shows that people are doing it, uploading documents to ChatGPT and to review them and getting the texts. So I think the editors really, I think probably editors should be saying to reviewers, you can't do this, but authors can, but then they have to acknowledge it. I guess depending on the journal.
But it's very difficult for authors to policy any of those things. I mean, telling someone you can't do something doesn't mean that they won't be able to do it. So we can actually go the other direction. We could say everything needs to be a preprint, and that way, it's out there already, so you can't upload. I'm kidding, but it's it's a difficult aspect. I want to ask if, yes, please, Lou, you had a comment.
I feel like maybe we need the author's consent of like, if they need to know, they need to be like notice that their like content has been used in some AI platforms. And another way is that in the review flow, when we think about this, we only use user highlighted content, which is like a part of sentences in a paper. We don't give the full PDF to the AI tool to prevent this copyright issues. But I think a better way, maybe like authors and all the review communities need to be consented in the process.
I would also like to comment live on the Orison's question here that we cannot acknowledge AI. I think that's a little bit wrongly putting it. We use other tools today in editorial processes like the plagiarism checks, the copy editing or language editing, and you can acknowledge them. I mean, it's not that you cannot say it hasn't been used. It is only a question of, ICMGA did say you cannot list them as an authors, but we've seen, if you just go through Google Scholar, you will see papers where ChatGPT has been listed as authors, especially in articles that are called, My Conversation with ChatGPT, and then you see what it sort of produces. But on side of that question, we know, saying that AI is not allowed for other purposes than improving language is not really true. So many startups today are trying to use AI to both design the study, to maybe help writing it, to ask questions, to generate ideas, and even to extract data or, help with data gathering and cleaning. And if you have seen one of the most recent posts that was sort of viral on Twitter, was asking ChatGPT to analyze the raw data, uploading data to it, and then getting a full analysis that was more detailed than actually analysis that many of the young PhD students or young researchers that we have would be able to do. So I think we are, this is the beginning of this era, and I would like to thank all of you for joining. We are now past the time. We're going to, if you have more time, we're going to be online for a few more minutes, so feel free to ask additional questions and we'll try to answer them in chat. This will be available online, and thank you all again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for organizing this.
Yeah, thank you. Great session.
So one final question for me to you guys. You've been sort of the pioneers in doing research on this, where a lot of people is thinking of it. What excites you most? What do you see as the next step? Maybe as a final wrap up.
Good question.
So I am actually very excited about this potential of large language model to be like a co-advisor, right, for a lot of researchers, right? I mean, if you think about a lot of research, right, especially in scientific domains, a lot of it's coming off the flavor of that's taking ideas from A and B, right, from two different fields and putting them together in some new ways to show some new applications. And I think language model, because it's reading all of the literature, right? So that's a lot more papers than any of us can physically read. I think it's very capable of finding these connections of A plus B that humans just haven't had a chance to make those connections, right? So I think there are a lot of those connections where the model can give feedback on or even give proposals on to the authors, right? I think that would be very useful in all those stages, from the ideation parts, beginning of research, all the way to the later stages of figuring out how to frame a given a paper, or even figure out which journal to submit it to.
Mike, Lou, any last words from you?
Yeah, I'm excited about something that really probably no one else is, which is so I think peer review is very hard to understand. Human peer review is very hard to understand. We all do it, but there's a lot of disagreement between human reviewers, and I think we would be bad at articulating exactly what we're assessing, because everything we assess is different. Every article we assess is different. But I think getting ChatGPT generated peer review reports and getting the ability to detect them and analyze how ChatGPT does it will help us to understand how we do it better, as a kind of a contrast. I hope.
It's a very good approach.
I feel peer review is an ecosystem. It involves like many communities and stakeholders. So I think my visions of LLM is like how can it use to support this whole ecosystem and help improve reviewers in their peer review writing ability. I think peer review should still exist, but like I will try to make like reviewers write better reviews, meta reviewers write better meta reviews, and make fair decisions.
Well, thank you all again, and thank you for sticking a few more minutes afterwards. I hope to see you one day in person. And again, thank you for the very big time difference. I know for us, this was an early morning thing. So have a great day, everyone, and hope to catch you on one of the other EASE webinars.